Hey everybody, good morning. Hey, welcome to the morning devotion, 8:30, September 16th. And we're going to be in Jeremiah chapter 46 today, and my name's Bo, and Bo Willette's my name. And you can always check out the archives of the YouTube channel, of my videos at my YouTube channel. So all you need to do is go to YouTube, and there's a search bar, and you could type in my name, Bo Willette. It's a very French name, so a ton of vowels. And then you come to my YouTube page. And on my YouTube page, there is a playlist, and you'll see the New Testament there, and a lot of books of the Bible. And I actually go through my devotions just book by book and verse by verse, and I just go through it and pull out some of the gems in the chapters. You know, a lot of people don't do a devotion in Jeremiah 46. You know, you'll see why. But Jeremiah is kind of known as the weeping prophet, a prophet that's pretty bummed out because of the war that is taking place between Babylon and his hometown, if you will, in the area of Judea, and especially the city of Jerusalem being captured by the Babylonians. And in turn, the siege on the city that has devastated the people, many of them taken already to Babylon, but then, you know, many left with no food or nothing, literally to starve to death. And so all throughout this, there's this promise of Yahweh to the people that one day they would get brought back into this land of Israel, and they will dwell safely. But in order to dwell safely, there's got to be a, if you will, a reckoning or an accountability with the enemies of Israel. And it's interesting, when God, Yahweh, makes this covenant with Abraham, this kind of calling Abraham out of paganism, out of worshiping a false deity, there is this moment where it says, you know, he who curses you curses, you know, basically themselves, the person who comes against Abraham and his descendants would, in a sense, invoke a curse upon them, right? They would be judged for their hatred of Abraham and his descendants. In the book of Zechariah, it says that Israel is the apple of God's eye. Yeah. And as we're reading these prophets, we see that there's a plan and a purpose for Israel. Israel was to be a light to the world. And they failed miserably. And they decided to worship go back to that pagan deity, go back to false gods. God says, where is the evidence for those things? And they cannot come up with any. So let's read chapter 46 and see how this thing kind of goes. Jeremiah, we saw, was actually taken to Egypt and told the people, don't go to Egypt. Egypt's not going to help you. Egypt's not going to help during the time of war. You might think they are, but they're not. So it says, the following messages were given to Jeremiah the prophet from the Lord concerning foreign nations. Okay, so it says, this message concerning Egypt was given in the 4th year of the reign of Jehoiakim, son of Josiah, the king of Judah, on the occasion of the battle of Carchemish, when Pharaoh Necho, the king of Egypt, and his army were defeated beside the Euphrates River by King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. So I find this pretty cool in that here you have these details of these ancient wars that took place. And I love that about the Bible. Again, I grew up thinking that the Bible was kind of like a myth, very fairy tale-y. And I never really thought that actually the Bible was rooted in history. But yet Egypt is a real place, right? The Euphrates River is a real place. This isn't speaking as though this is just some made-up thing. And so it says, prepare your shields and advance into battle. Harness the horses and mount the stallions. Take your positions, put on your helmets, sharpen your spears, and prepare your armor. But what do I see? The Egyptian army flees in terror. The bravest of its fighting men run without a backward glance. They're freaking out. And they're terrorized at every turn, says the Lord. The swiftest runners cannot flee. The mightiest warriors cannot escape. By the Euphrates River to the north, they stumble and fall. Who is this rising like the Nile at flood time, overflowing all the land? It is the Egyptian army, overflowing all the land, boasting that it will cover the earth like a flood, destroying cities and their people. Charge you horses and chariots. Attack, you mighty warriors of Egypt. Come, all you allies from Ethiopia, Libya, and Lydia. These are places who are skilled with the shield and bow. So we see that there is this war that's going to take place, this battle that's going to happen between Babylon and Egypt. And it talks about it as being the Battle of Carchemish, which is pretty cool. And you see this description of the Egyptian army about, getting ready for war, but yet even the bravest of the Egyptian army is fleeing, is running away. You get the idea that the Egyptian army's not going to win, all right? And so, I kind of, when I think in a devotional sense, if you will, this morning, in reading this verse or these chapters or these verses in the chapter, I kind of start thinking about life, thinking about my life and thinking about what does this mean to me? What does it really mean to me? Well, the way I first see it is I put it into today's world, in a sense. Today there's a lot of enemies of Israel, even today. And there's a lot of people that want to attack Israel today. So I see that. I also see that we can get overwhelmed with so much of what goes on in the world, just as Jeremiah does. But yet, through this prophecy of Jeremiah, we kind of come to understand that maybe God knows much more than we think he does. Maybe we don't give God enough credit for what God knows. And what I mean by that is God seems to be very much in control. We get kind of squirrely in our life because a lot of things are out of control. There's no doubt. We feel that with our bodies, don't we? When our bodies are not doing what we want them to do, they seem out of control. And that brings on a lot of things, panic, and our bodies are reacting weird. And that's a scary thing. But if I knew that I knew that I knew that I knew that God had me, that God would raise my body, that God is with me, just that idea alone, God with you, Emmanuel. Man, that's a huge statement. Emmanuel, God with you? That's pretty intense, because when you look out in the world, you don't see much God with you, right? You see a lot of human beings running around not doing very well at all. Having the confidence that God is in control and he is with you, man, that's everything. Doesn't mean we don't have that human reaction of kind of being scared. But it is everything for a sound mind to know that God has us. Another thing I think of is the accountability that Egypt has. Egypt has done a lot of things to Israel. And Israel, in a sense, has used Egypt as well. And instead of Israel going to Yahweh for help and crying out to God, a lot of times they've cried out to Egypt. to other nations to help them. And now there's an accountability, not just with Israel, as most of the book of Jeremiah is about, but there's an accountability too with the other nations. And I find that fascinating, right? No one, literally no nation, gets by Yahweh. Yahweh truly is the God of all. And that's how the Bible talks about Yahweh. Not just this localized Yahweh, but Yahweh's Yahweh over Egypt too, and over other places as well, the entire world. So it says in verse 10, "For this is the day of the Lord of heaven's armies." Whenever you see the day of the Lord, by the way, those are always like, times of judgment. Whenever you see that in the Bible. And it says, "A day of vengeance on his enemies. The sword will devour it until it's satisfied. Yes, until it is drunk with your blood." Meaning the sword is like a mouth drinking alcohol. It's going to keep devouring its prey, right? The alcohol. It's going to keep devouring beer after beer after beer, whatever it is, right? Meaning person after person, until it is satisfied. And it says, the Lord of heaven's armies, will receive a sacrifice today in the north country beside the Euphrates River. Go up to Gilead and get medicine, O virgin daughter of Egypt. I find that a title fascinating. Might be something to study a little bit. O virgin daughter of Egypt, but your many treatments will bring you no healing. The nations have heard of your shame. The earth is filled with your cries of despair. Your mightiest warriors will run into each other and fall down together. I like how it says that the nations have heard of your shame. You know, everybody knows about what you've done, what you're like. You know, you think of that about your own life. Like, what if everybody knew what you really were like? Oh, man, that'd be tough. You know, a lot of times we live to try to cover up stuff. You know, we're always, and that's where we get the idea of atonement. You're always trying to, in a sense, make a sacrifice, cover over your frailty. That's why we're wearing clothes, by the way, right? It's a fact that we're always covering up. That's what we do as human beings. It's like living with a perpetual shame. But it's interesting that even though individuals do that, nations do that, constantly covering up. Does that sound like today? A nation constantly covering up, constantly, saying, oh, no, and not even mentioning things, right? We just had a presidential debate. And you know what? Sometimes it's interesting to watch it and find out what is actually absent from the debate, right? What is conspicuously absent, especially in our day of 2024? Over the last 4 years, what has happened in our world? Has there been any anomalies in our world over the last 4 years? And yet, what was conspicuously absent, from that debate? Maybe we're trying to cover up ourselves. Maybe there's a cover-up that we do, even in a national sense. But, there's always a time of reckoning, right? There's always a time of accounting in life and in the life of a nation. So it says, the Lord gave the prophet Jeremiah this message about King Nebuchadnezzar and his plans to attack Egypt. Shout it in Egypt. Publish it in the cities of Migdol, Memphis, and Taphanes. Mobilize for battle, for the sword will devour everyone around you. Hey, put this in the news. You guys are gonna go to war, and it's not gonna go good. Why have your warriors fallen? They cannot stand, for the Lord has knocked them down. Yahweh has knocked them down. They stumble and fall over each other, and they say among themselves, come, let us go back to the people, to the land of our birth. Let's get away from the sword of the enemy. Let's go back to where we were from. Meaning people that are in the countries they're in, they come from other places. Isn't that interesting? We all are travelers. We all, in a sense, are people that have gone from one country, one state to another place. We all, in a sense, are those people who are trying to find a resting spot. I find that interesting. Everybody's trying to find rest, a place, in a sense, to lay their head, right? And Egypt, it says, hey, you guys are going to go back, to the land of our birth. It says, let us get away from this sword of enemy. And there they will say, Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, is a loudmouth who missed his opportunity. As surely as I live, says the king whose name is the Lord of Heaven's armies. So that's a title, right? The Lord of Heaven's armies. He is the king. It says, one is coming against Egypt, who is as tall as Mount Tabor or as Mount Carmel by the sea. Now, by the way, this is just another little insight into the God of the Bible being unique. That the God of the Bible is not just outside of time, matter, and space, but at some point will be on the planet as a king. That means he's going to have a what? A body. And this is how the Old Testament always talks about the deity. That the deity is all outside of time, matter, and space. Also, his spirit is everywhere within it. And also, he can be and will be on a specific dot in time, matter, and space, meaning on the planet with a body. Yeah. And a unique God is described in the Old Testament. Not just one of one, as in one out in space somewhere or outside of time, matter, and space, and that's it. That's not the God of the Old Testament. The God of the Old Testament is not only outside of time, matter, and space, but everywhere within time, matter, and space, and could be on the dot, on a specific place on the planet, yet still be everywhere at once, and yet still be outside of time, matter, and space. Wow. Very unique. Right? Jesus, they wanted to hail as king. Interesting too, right? Well, there is a king, and he is the Lord of Heaven's armies, right? And one is coming against Egypt, who is tall as Mount Tabor, or as Mount Carmel by the sea. Pack up, get ready to leave for exile, you citizens of Egypt. The cities of Memphis will be destroyed without a single inhabitant. Egypt is as sleek as a beautiful young cow, but a horsefly from the north is on its way. Those pesky north, flies. Egypt mercenary. I just watched, by the way, The Fly from 1958 with Vincent Price. That was great. It says, Egypt's mercenaries have become like fattened calves. They too will turn and run. For it is a day of great disaster for Egypt, a time of great punishment. Egypt flees, silent as a serpent gliding away. The invading army marches in. They come against her with axes like woodsmen. Ooh, gosh, could you imagine going to war and having axes come at you? Man, that's pretty intense. It sounds like a horror flick. They will cut down her people like trees, says the Lord, for they are numerous, more than locusts. Egypt will be humiliated. She will be handed over to people from the north. Handed over, there's that principle of kind of like, if you don't want the true and living God, then you get to be handed over to your own imaginational God. You get to go your own direction, and that's what we do as human beings, right? We become spiritual. We make up stuff. We say, this is what I think. Maybe I don't think right. Maybe that's why I have to trust a person like Jesus, because maybe I'm not thinking right. Maybe the things I make up about God are actually not correct. Maybe just as there's a right and wrong with math, maybe there's a right and wrong when it comes to God. To be handed over. Gosh, that's a bummer. I don't like that kind of phrase, right? I mean, it just, it's like, whoa, it's kind of one of those scary things to be handed over. And it says, the Lord of Heaven's armies, the God of Israel, says, I will punish Ammon, the god of Thebes, and all the other gods of Egypt. I will punish its rulers and Pharaoh too, and all who trust in him. I will hand them over to those who want them killed, to King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon and his army. But afterward, the land will recover from its ravages of war. The Lord has spoken. Okay, so the Lord will speak, and he speaks and says, hey, your land will be restored at some point, but right now you're going, there's an accountability, and there's a reckoning that's going to happen at this time. And so Pharaoh's going to be handed over to the king of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, and his armies, and there will be a punishing of the god of Thebes and all the other gods of Egypt. So it's kind of it's an interesting war, because it's not just against, in a sense, Egypt, but it's against too their ideologies. Isn't that interesting? A war of ideologies. Your God's not real, kind of thing. And Yahweh says, I am the true and the living God. And so it goes on and it says, but do not be afraid, Jacob. This is a term for Israel. My servant, do not be dismayed, Israel. For I will bring you home again from distant lands, and your children will return from their exile. Israel will return to a life of peace and quiet, and no one will terrorize them. Do not be afraid, Jacob, my servant, for I am with you, says the Lord. I will completely destroy the nations to which I have exiled you, but I will not completely destroy you. I will discipline you, but with justice I cannot let you go unpunished. I cannot. So interesting. God is obviously punishing Israel. That's what the book of Jeremiah certainly is about. But it also is about the reckoning and the accountability that Yahweh has with the nations, even to where Israel is going. Now, it's interesting because I live in a day and age where Israel still is not completely in the land. There's Israelites all over the world. And I wonder how they're being treated. Now, this is interesting because Jesus in the book of Matthew, chapter 25, says that there will be a reckoning to the nations. It's called the judgment of the nations. Jesus talks about a time where he will return in his glory. Interesting. King Yahweh is the king of the Lord of heaven's armies. And Jesus talks about coming in his glory, right? And that he will set up his kingdom. And this kingdom, those who are allowed to go in, it will be contingent on how they have treated Jesus's brethren. That's right. Those that are with Jesus, those that are his brethren. Ethnically, who is that? The Jews. Those who have finally trusted in Messiah. And Jesus says, depending on how you treated them, will be whether you come in. It's a very interesting judgment in the Bible. There's many judgments in the Bible, and this is one of them, the judgment of the nations. And so we see that there will be an ultimate day of reckoning for the nations to where the Israelites have gone. How has my country that I'm living in right now treated the Jewish people? How has Russia treated the Jewish people? Wherever they've gone, where is that nation? How has that nation treated them? And maybe that there is a day of reckoning to those nations at some point. And Jesus says, yes, there is. Again, a lot of times we don't like ideas of judgment because we want to, in a sense, avoid accountability. And that's natural for us because we don't want to be, in a sense, exposed, right, for our bad actions, right? We want to instead think those actions are good, right, or just make up another God to where there is no judgment. And that's how we deal with that usually as human beings. But we know that in life, just the fact of life is that there always is a day of reckoning. and that judgments are happening all the time. You're always trying to help your children understand what is the good and what is the bad. You can't get around that. If your child picks up a knife, you don't just say, that's great. You usually say, you take it from them and try to help them understand that this is dangerous the best you can. Yeah, so we know innately that there is a right, that there is a wrong, but we usually run from that, even though there is that day that it's going to come there, So we see in the Old Testament something that is going to take place in a larger scale in a future time, even from our time. A day of reckoning to the nations for how they've treated Israel. What's your idea of Israel today? What are your thoughts about Israel? Jesus has some words for you, right? That's right. There's going to be a judgment to the nations contingent on how you've treated his brethren. And, he says salvation is from the Jews. Man, how are you treating them? What's in your heart about them? It's not that you got to love everything that the nation of Israel does, as far as like geopolitical or things like that, or their war or whatever it is. But it's, where's your heart? Do you have a disdain, a hatred? You gotta watch that. So it says the nations will mistreat Israel and the Israelites when they go different places. So there's some encouragement here, right? And that is, do not be afraid. And it goes right back to the first chapter of Jeremiah, right? Don't be afraid. Hey, I'm going to be with you, right? I will deal with people. So I'm going to have to trust God today with God dealing with people, and maybe realize that, God will work on their heart. They'll have an accountability to, what they did. And God will, his work is much more fine, and his grinding is much more, intense than mine. He knows how to get down there, and deal with it. So, hey, great chapter. We'll talk to you guys later. Have a great Monday. Bye-bye.